Lesson 10, Present Indicative Passive, conjugations 1 through 4, the ablative of the agent. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lenny's Latin class. Today we're on Lesson 10, which is on page 32. The first thing we're going to work on today is the passive voice. Okay, so we need to learn the difference between active and passive. In a nutshell, when a verb is active, someone is actively performing an action on a target. So let's use the verb praise to talk about the difference between active and passive. If I get a chance to speak to the king, I go into the king's chamber and I say, "O king, you are great and wonderful and fabulous." Okay, and in doing so, I am praising the king. So in that example, the verb praise is active. Okay, that's what we call the active voice. I am praising the king. So I am the subject of the sentence, and I'm actually doing the action to someone else. But what if the king says back to me, "Well, Bill, you're fabulous too. You're fabulous, you're great, you're wonderful." Now I can say I am being praised by the king. Okay, I'm no longer doing an action. Now the action is being done to me. I am passively experiencing action being done to me by another party. So that's the basic difference between active and passive. When a verb is active, you're doing the action to someone. When it's passive, you are just sitting there while someone else does an action to you. You are passively experiencing someone else doing an action to you. So I praise the king. That's an active verb there, the word praise. But if I say I am being praised, that's passive. Okay, so in Latin, to express this idea of the passive voice, we have to learn a new set of endings, okay? So if you look in section 99 here, you'll see these new endings I'm referring to. In the first person singular, we have the letter R. So if I add the letter R as my ending, that will mean that action is being done to me. In the second person singular, we have RIS. So that means that you are passively having something done to you. TUR in the third person singular, that's he, she, or it. MUR in the first person plural, MINI in the second person plural, and NTUR in the third person plural. Now let's go to the next page, page 33, and look at section 100. Here we will see actual examples of verbs with our new endings stuck to the end. So let's look at the first one, which is laudo. If you want to say I am praising, you would say laudo, but when you add the letter R, it becomes passive, and now it's I am being praised. So if I'm praising the king, saying, "Oh king, you're great, you're wonderful, you're fabulous," that's laudo, I'm praising. But if I'm being praised by the king is saying, "Bill, you're fabulous, you're great, you're wonderful." Now I am being praised. That's laudor. Laudor, I am being praised. Okay, now it's passive, and I am passively experiencing action being done to me. Okay, so laudo, I praise. Laudor, I am being praised. Okay, next, laudaris, that's you are being praised. Laudatur, he, she, or it is being praised. Laudamur, we are being praised. Laudamini, y'all are being praised. Laudantur, they are being praised. Notice that in the third person, the forms are the same as active, but with the letters U and R attached. So laudat becomes laudatur, and laudant becomes laudantur. So we have a similarity there between active and passive. Let's go on to the second conjugation here. And the example verb they give, as usual, is moneo, which means warn or advise. So moneo would mean I advise or I warn. But if you add the letter R, you get moneor, I am being warned or I am being advised. Okay, moneris, you are being advised. Monetur, he is being advised. Monemor, monemini, monentur, etc., etc. In the third conjugation, our example verb is the verb rego, which means to rule. So rego means I rule, but if we add the letter R, we get regor, which means I am being ruled. So regor, regeris, regatur, regemur, regimini, reguntur. Notice the short vowels in the second person. We don't have regeris because the E is short. Since that vowel is short, the accent recedes one syllable to the left and you get regeris. Same with regatur. The I there is short, so instead of regitur, the accent goes one syllable to the left and you get regatur. In the third person plural, reguntur, you have a closed syllable on the penult. Okay, quick review here. The ultima is the last syllable of a word. That comes from the Latin word which means last. The next to last syllable is the penult. That comes from the Latin words pine, which means almost, and ultima, which means last. So pine ultima, almost last. That's where we get the word penult, which is the next to last syllable. The third syllable from the end is the antepenult. Okay, ante means before, pine means almost, and ultima means last. So the before almost last syllable, the antepenult, that's third from the end. So the last syllable is the ultima, the next to last syllable is the penult, and the third from the end is the antepenult. Okay, so here in the verb reguntur, the penult is gun, and that's a closed syllable. Since it's a closed syllable, it takes longer to say, so it's a long syllable, even though it has a short vowel. So that will get the accent, and we'll say reguntur. Moving on to the fourth conjugation, our example verb is audio, which means to hear. If I say audio, that means I hear. But if we add the letter R, we get audior, and that means I am being heard. Okay, so it changes it from active to passive. So we have forms like audior, audiris, auditur, audimur, audimini, audiuntur. Notice that the long vowels are back again in the second person and third person singular. In the third person plural, again, we have a closed syllable there. The U, N, and T say unt. That's a closed syllable, which makes that syllable read as long. So that will get the accent. So we get audiuntur. So if you'll take a moment to study these forms, what you'll find is the endings here are very regular. There's no variation as far as the endings go. So if you want, you can go back to section 99 and memorize the endings. You can say R, RIS, TUR, MUR, MINI, NTUR. Or you could say something like R, RIS, TUR, MUR, MINI, INTUR. Whatever works for you, but just familiarize yourself with the endings. And of course, you'll want to start using these forms in the sentences that you say when you speak the language. That's where you get the really good practice that helps you learn the different verb forms. Okay, let's move on to section 101 and learn some new vocabulary. First we have lingua, linguae, a feminine noun of the first declension, which means language. Literally, it means tongue. So we have related English words like linguistics. If someone gives you some medication that is sublingual, that means you put the medication under your tongue. Okay, next is natura, naturae, a feminine noun of the first declension, which means nature. Next is finitimi, finitimorum, which means neighbors. This is related to the Latin word finis, which means border or boundary. We have related English words like final and infinite. In the word infinite, the I and the N serve as a negative, and it means no boundary or no limit. Next we have locus, loci, a masculine noun of the second declension, which means place. We have English words like location and locale. Next, populus, populi, a masculine noun of the second declension, which means people or nation. Of course, we have English words like population or populace even. Next, we have eugum, eugi. That's a neuter noun of the second declension, which means yoke or ridge. And a yoke is a piece of wood that you put across the necks of two animals to join them together. So if you have two oxen pulling your ox cart, you might put a yoke on them so that they pull the ox cart together as a team. So the yoke goes across joining two oxen, and so that same word means the ridge of mountains. Like if you have some mountains next to each other, then the ridge that goes across the top connecting them, that's also a eugum. In Latin, the word for under is sub, S-U-B, and if you put that along with eugum, we get English words like subjugate. So if you subjugate a nation, you literally put them under the yoke. Next we have a number, unus, una, unum, which means one. This is a declinable number. So if you look in the appendix, you'll see all the declined endings. Only the numbers 1, 2, and 3 have declined endings. Once you get to the number 4, they become indeclinable. Like the word quatuor, which means 4, it does not take different declined endings. But 1, 2, and 3 do. And you can see those in the appendix. As I was saying a moment ago, sub in Latin means under. It can also mean at the foot of. For instance, if you say sub muro, you might translate that as at the foot of the wall. We have an informative footnote here. The footnote says, sub is used with the accusative to denote motion toward, with the ablative to denote rest in a place. So sub is a two-way preposition. It can take the accusative or the ablative. Turning the page, we get more vocabulary on page 34. Appello, appellare, appellavi, appellatum. This verb means to call someone by name or to name something. For instance, if you name your dog Rex, that's appello. You're naming him something. Next is expugno. This is simply the verb pugno, which you already know, with the preposition ex on the front of it. And that means to capture, as in capture a town by storm. So we would have expugno, expugnare, expugnavi, expugnatum. By the way, for appello, we have English words like appellation. Next is wostow. That's a first conjugation verb, wostow, wastare, wastawi, wastatum, which means to lay waste or devastate. In fact, the English word devastate, you can see V-A-S-T in there. Well, that's from the Latin word wostow. Next is contineo. This is also a compound verb. By the way, a compound verb is a verb that has a prepositional prefix of some kind stuck to the front of it. So here's a compound verb. It's con plus teneo. Teneo means to hold. So conteneo, contenere, continui, contentum. It means to bound, hem in, or restrain. I believe our English word contain is related to this. Next is abduco, another compound verb. It's the verb duco, which means lead, along with the prepositional prefix ab, which means from. So abduco means to lead away. It's a third conjugation verb, so we get forms like abduco, abducere, abduxi, abductum. And in that fourth principal part, you can see the English word abduct. Next is mitto, mittere, misi, missum, which means send. We have a ton of English words related to this, like transmit, submit, also words like missile, and even words like mission. Next we have relinquo, relinquere, reliqui, relictum. And this verb means to leave behind. We have English words related to this verb like relinquish, and also words like relic. If there's some artifact left behind by someone, you could say that's a relic. And a case that you put relics in is called a reliquary. So we have lots of English words related to this one. Let's move on now to section 102. And let's not write these out. Let's simply do them verbally together. Later on, you can write out the exercises in section 106. So in 102, we have number 1, portaris, uberis, duceris. And these are some passive forms for you to practice with. Portaris is a form of the verb porto, which means to carry. This is second person singular, but it's passive, so it means you are being carried. Next, uberis, that's a form of the verb eubeo, which means to command. Here again, it's second person singular, so it means you are being commanded. Duceris is a form of the verb duco, which means lead, and it's second person singular, passive voice, so it means you are being led. Number 2 is next, contenemur, ducemur. Contenemur is a form of the verb conteneo. That's one of our new verbs for this lesson. And it's first person plural. That means we are doing something, but it's passive, so it means the action is passively happening to us. So we'll translate contenemur as we are being bound in, or we are being hemmed in. Ducemur, again, that's a form of the verb duco, which means to lead. This is first person plural, passive voice, so it says we are being led. In number 3, we have more passive verbs to practice with. Dantur, muniuntur. Dantur is a form of the verb do, which means give. And it's third person plural, passive, so it says they are being given. Muniuntur is a form of the verb munio, which means fortify. And also it is third person plural, passive. So it says they are being fortified. Number 4 is next. Datur, munitur, ubetur. Datur is a form of the verb do, which means give. And this is third person singular passive. So it means he, she, or it is being given. Munitur, again, that's a form of the verb munio, which means fortify. And this is third person singular, so it's he, she, or it is being fortified. Ubetur is a form of the verb eubeo, which means command or order. And it's also third person singular, so it says he, she, or it is being commanded or being ordered. Number 5 is next. Contenemini, ducemini. Notice the mini endings on both of these. That's second person plural, passive voice. Contenemini is a form of the verb conteneo. That's one of our new verbs for this lesson. It means to bound or hem in or restrain. So kontinemini means y'all are being bound in or y'all are being restrained. Dukimini is a form of the verb duko, which means lead. So that says y'all are being led. Okay, that's all the Latin for section 102. Let's move on now to our model sentences in section 103. And in section 103, we're going to learn about agent. Okay? With a passive verb, you often have an agent stated, that is, the person doing the action. Okay? If I have a sentence that says, the ball is being hit, I might want to say, who is doing the action? I might want to say, the ball is being hit by the boy. Okay? If I say the ball is being hit, I'm stating it in a passive way. Instead of saying the boy hits the ball, that would be active. Instead, I'm saying the ball is being hit, and that's passive. But then if I say by the boy, then that's telling the agent. That's saying who is doing it. So in English, we use the word by for that. We say by the boy. In Latin, you use the ablative case along with the preposition a or ab. So let's take a look at model sentence number 1, and we'll see the difference between active voice and passive voice. And then in number 2, we'll get to see how in Latin we express agent. Okay? So model sentence number 1 says, Nautai victoriam nuntiant. Okay, the subject here is nautai. That means sailors. And the verb is nuntiant. That's a form of the verb nuntio, which means to report or announce, things like that. And victoriam is the direct object. That's accusative singular. So number 1 says, the sailors are reporting the victory. So in number 1, you have an active verb. The subject of the sentence is nautai, and they are actively doing an action. They're doing an action to something, in this case the victory, and the verb is active. Now let's see that same expression of thought, but stated in a passive kind of way. In number 2, we have Victoria a nautis nuntiatur. Okay, now we're flipping around the structure in such a way where the word victory is now the subject of the sentence. So instead of someone doing an action to the victory, and the victory being the direct object, now the victory is the subject of the sentence, and the action is being experienced passively by the subject of the sentence. Okay? So here, Victoria is the subject, and the verb is a passive verb. That's nuntiatur. That's a form of the verb nuntio, which means to announce or report. And notice the tur ending. It's third person singular, passive. So Victoria and nuntiatur together say, the victory is being announced, or the victory is being reported. And when you have a passive verb like that, oftentimes you want to say who is doing the action. And that's what we call expressing agent. Okay, in English, we would say by someone. We would use the word by and then say who is doing the action. In Latin, you use the word a or ab, which is a preposition that requires the ablative case. A and ab are the same word. If the next word starts with a consonant, you use a. If the next word starts with a vowel, you use ab. That's the difference. It depends on what the next word starts with. Here, the next word starts with a consonant, so we choose the spelling a, and we get a nautis. That means by the sailors. So a nautis is showing us agent, the party that is doing the action, along with a passive verb. So number 2 says, the victory is being reported by the sailors. Okay, so this is a very important concept to understand in Latin grammar. So let's hit it one more time. In number 1, the sailors are the subject of the sentence. They are actively doing an action, and victoriam is the direct object. Why? Because the verb is an active verb. In number 2, we flip the structure around in such a way where Victoria is now the subject of the sentence, and it's being acted upon by a passive verb. So Victoria now is passively experiencing action being done to it. And then anautis tells us the agent. Okay, in number 1, the sailors were the subject of the sentence, actively doing the action. Here in number 2, it's an ablative of agent because the verb is passive and we need to know who was doing the action. So we have anautis to say by the sailors. Okay, so if that's clear, great. If it's not clear, keep working with it for a few minutes until you understand these basic differences in construction between model sentence 1 and model sentence 2, because it's pretty important for understanding grammar. Okay, moving on to section 104, we have a rule to remember, and that is, with a passive verb, the person by whom an action is done is expressed by the ablative with a or ab. Okay, again, a or ab plus an ablative, that tells you who the action is being done by. Just like we saw in model sentence 2 with anautis. Moving on to section 105. In section 105, the authors of the book tell us about something called a predicate noun, which you already know about. Here they're telling us about it being used with a passive verb. So let's read this section together. The passive verbs with which a predicate noun may be used are those meaning to be named, called, chosen, made, and the like. So what they're saying here is that if you have a sentence like, my dog is called Rex, then in that sentence the word Rex would be in the nominative case. Let's move to the top of page 35 and see an example. Ariovistus, that's a person's name, by the way. We'll learn more about Ariovistus in forthcoming chapters. Ariovistus a populo Romano amicus appellatur. Okay, let's break this sentence down. Again, Ariovistus is a person's name, and the verb here is appellatur. That's a form of the verb appello, which is one of our new verbs for this lesson. It means to name something or call something. And appellatur, as you can see, is third person singular passive. So Ariovistus and appellatur together will say Ariovistus is being called, or Ariovistus is being named. And then we have an ablative of agent, a populo Romano. That's the preposition a or ab with an ablative singular, populo Romano, that means the Roman people. So Ariovistus is being called by the Roman people, and what is he being called? Amicus, friend. That's a special title of diplomacy. It means the Roman people have given him that title to show their relationship, to show that they are allies. So Ariovistus is called friend by the Roman people. And the point here is that amicus is a predicate noun, and it's going to be in the nominative case because it's in agreement with Ariovistus, which is the subject of the sentence. And here's an important point to remember. A passive verb cannot generate a direct object. A passive verb can only generate a predicate, and that predicate is going to be in the nominative case. An active voice verb can generate a direct object, but a passive voice verb cannot generate a direct object. Okay, let's move on now to section 106. That's our translation section for this lesson. So turn off the recording, translate these exercises into English on a separate sheet of paper, and when you're finished, turn the recording back on and we'll go over them together. Okay, hopefully by now you've finished your homework. Let's go over the exercises in section 106 together, starting with number 1. Number 1 says, Celtae nostra lingua Galli appellantur. Okay, in number 1 we have a passive verb, that's appellantur. That's a form of the verb appello, which means to call someone something or name someone something. And it's third person plural, passive voice. Notice the NTUR ending. So it says, they are being named or they are being called. And the subject here is Celtae. That's the Celts, the inhabitants of Gaul. So together, Celtae and appellantur say the Celts are called, or the Celts are being called. And we have a predicate noun, which is Galli. That's what they're being called. They're being called Gauls. And finally, we have an ablative of means, nostra lingua. Nostra lingua means our language, and it's ablative singular from the first declension. You can tell by the macron or macron over the final A in lingua. So number 1 could be translated as, the Celts, by our language, are called Gauls. Or we might say in our language, the Celts, in our language, are called Gauls. Number 2 is next, Celtas Gallos appellamus. So in number 1, we saw the verb appello being used in a passive way. Here it's being used in an active way. It's first person plural, so it's we doing the action. So appellamus says we call or we name. And then we have 2 nouns in the accusative. We have Celtas, and that's the direct object. So appellamos and Celtas together will say, we call the Celts. And then we have another accusative to show what it is that we call the Celts, the name that we give them. And that's also accusative. So number 2 says, we call the Celts Gauls. And if you look at the footnote at the bottom, footnote 3, it calls the word Gallos a predicate accusative. It's similar to a predicate nominative, but in this case, it's renaming a word that was already in the accusative case, so it needs to be accusative as well. So in this sentence, basically you have 2 accusatives. Number 3 is next, finitimi helvetiorum pacantur. Okay, our verb is pacantur. That's a form of the verb paco, which means to subdue. And it's third person plural, passive voice. Notice the NTUR ending. So pacantur says they are being subdued. And the subject here is finitimi. That means neighbors. It's nominative plural. And it's being possessed by helvetiorum. Helvetiorum is genitive plural. It means of the helvetii. So number 3 says, the neighbors of the helvetii are being subdued. Number 4 is next, signum ab helvetiis videtur. Okay, the verb here is videtur. That's a form of the verb video, which means see. And here it's third person singular, passive voice. Notice the TUR ending. So videtur says he, she, or it is being seen. And what's being seen? The signum. Remember, that's the standard that you carry into battle. It's like a stick that sticks up in the air with ornaments mounted on it, perhaps an eagle mounted on the very top. So signum and videtur together say the standard is being seen. And then with this passive verb videtur, we have an ablative of agent, like we studied in section 103 in model sentence number 2. Remember that with the preposition a or ab, you can show who a passive action is being performed by. Like in English, when you say by someone, so ab helvetiis is an ablative of agent. Ab is the preposition that means by, and helvetiis is ablative plural. So number 4 says, the standard is being seen by the helvetii. Number 5 is next. Copiae Romanorum sub jugum ab helvetiis mittuntur. Okay, Copiae Romanorum means the troops of the Romans. Remember that the word copia can mean troops or forces when it's plural. And the verb here is mittuntur. That's a form of the verb mitto, which means to send. Notice the ntur ending. It's third person plural passive voice. So Copiae Romanorum and mittuntur together say the troops of the Romans are being sent. We have an ablative of agent, ab helvetiis, that's by the helvetii, and a prepositional phrase, sub jugum, that means under the yoke. And there's an interesting footnote here. Footnote number 4 says, the jugum referred to consisted of 2 spears set upright in the ground with another placed across them. A conquered army was made to pass under this to indicate submission. So this is a kind of ceremony that was intended to humiliate a defeated opponent. Okay, this is called being sent under the yoke. Notice that sub here is taking the accusative case, sub jugum. If sub were taking the ablative case, as it often does, we would have sub jugo. But instead we have sub jugum. We saw a note earlier that said that the preposition sub is a two-way preposition. It can take the accusative or the ablative, and it takes the accusative when it's talking about motion toward. So here sub means under in the sense of being sent toward the jugum and then under it. So they're going under it, but at the same time toward it. So it's got a sense of motion toward, therefore it's taking the accusative case. And as I mentioned before, sub plus jugum, well, that's where we get our English word subjugate. So number 5 altogether will say, the troops of the Romans are being sent under the yoke by the helvetii. Number 6 is next. Relinquitur una per sequanos via. Okay, this is a little bit tricky because una and via go together. Una means one, via means road or way or route. Let's just translate it as road here. So una via says one road. And the verb here is relinquitur. That's a form of the verb relinquo. That's one of our new verbs for this lesson. In fact, let's look quickly at page 34. You'll see it listed last in the vocabulary list. It says relinquo, relinquere, reliqui, relictum, to leave behind. But in the passive, it means to be left or to remain. And in exercise 6, that's what we have. We have relinquo being used in the passive. So relinquitur is third person singular passive. So the idea is he, she, or it is being left behind. He, she, or it is left. He, she, or it remains. Okay, so una via, one road, relinquitur, one road remains, or one road is left. And then per sequanos is a prepositional phrase. The Sequani, well, they are a tribe of Gauls. Remember that the Sequana River is the ancient Roman name for the Seine River. And so these folks here are a tribe with that same name. So per sequanos means through the Sequani. So number 6 says, one road remains through the Sequani, or one road is left through the Sequani. Number 7 is next. Castra muro et fossa allegato muniuntur. Okay, the subject here is castra, which means camp, Grammatically, it's plural, but we translate it as the singular word camp. And since grammatically it's plural, it needs a plural verb, muniuntur. That's a form of the verb munio, which means to fortify. And here it's third person plural, passive voice. So muniuntur says, they are being fortified. So castra and muniuntur both grammatically are plural, but we'll translate them in a singular way. We'll say, the camp is being fortified. Then we have muro et fossa. These are both ablatives of means. Muro is the ablative singular form of murus, which means an outer wall. And fossa means ditch. So what we have so far would say, the camp is being fortified with a wall and with a ditch. And finally, we have an ablative of agent, as is often the case, with a passive verb. So muniuntur is our passive verb, and then a legato will tell us who that passive action is being performed by. So we'll translate a legato as by the lieutenant. So number 7 says, the camp is being fortified by the lieutenant with a wall and with a ditch. Number 8 is next. It's somewhat longer than what we're accustomed to, and it has 3 passive verbs. They're all third person plural, so watch for the ntur endings here. Number 8 says, agri haeduorum wastantur, liberi abducuntur, opida ab finitimis expugnantur. So there are 3 little parts to this sentence. Let's start with the first part. Agri haeduorum means the fields of the haedui. Haeduorum is genitive plural, and it's possessing agri. Agri is a form of one of our new words for this lesson, agir, which means field. That's one of those nouns that has a stem change in the genitive. The verb here is wastantur. Again, that's one of our new words for this lesson. It's the verb wostow, which means to lay waste or devastate. So this first part says, the fields of the haedui are being devastated. Then we get liberi abducuntur. Here, liberi is nominative plural. It means children. And the verb here is abducuntur. That's a form of the verb abduco, which means to lead away. You know that duco means lead, and ab means from. So abduco is lead away. And again, it's third person plural, passive voice. So liberi abducuntur will say, children are being led away. Finally, we have opida ab finitimis expugnantur. Opida means towns. That's nominative plural. The noun there is opidum. And the verb here is expugnantur. That's a form of the verb expugno, which means to capture or take by storm. So opida and expugnantur say towns are being captured or towns are being taken by storm. And ab finitimis is an ablative of agent. It's telling us by whom the passive action is being performed. So we'll translate ab finitimis as by their neighbors. We'll throw in the word their, T-H-E-I-R, because that's implied. It's talking about the haedui. So instead of by the neighbors, we'll say by their neighbors. In fact, there are several places in this sentence where we can throw in the word their. Since it's talking about the haedui, we can throw in the word their in several places. So let's translate number 8 like this. The fields of the haedui are being devastated. Their children are being led away. Their towns are being captured by their neighbors. Number 9 is next. Loci natura helvetii continentur. This one's kind of tricky. The subject here is helvetii, and the verb is continentur. Continentur is a form of the verb continentur is a form of the verb contineo, which means to hem in, bound or restrain. So Helvetii and Continentur will say the Helvetii are being hemmed in, or the Helvetii are being bound. Continentur is third person plural, passive voice. Natura is an ablative of means, and Loki is genitive singular. It's possessing natura. Okay, this is a little bit tricky because you could mistake Loki for a nominative plural. You could think it means places. Really, it means of the place. That's the noun locus, which means place. If you knew the plot of Caesar's Gallic Wars, this sentence would make a lot more sense. In the first book of Caesar's Gallic Wars, which is what we'll be reading in this course, the Helvetii, a tribe from the area which today is Switzerland, well, they feel hemmed in, they feel constricted, they feel a little claustrophobic because they feel that the geography of the area in which they live is preventing them from having enough room to move around. They have rivers, mountains, etc., all around them, and they feel somewhat constricted. So they come up with a plan to burn all their homes and towns and make a mass exodus out of Helvetia into another part of Gaul. Okay? And the plan doesn't work out so well, as we'll read in upcoming lessons. But the idea is that the natural geography of their homeland makes them feel constrained. Mountains, lakes, rivers, etc. So here in number 9, natura is an ablative of means, and Loki is possessing natura. So the way we'll translate it is by the nature of the place. I know this one's kind of tough. The word order is not what you're used to. But the idea here is the Helvetii are hemmed in or bound in by the nature of the place. That is, the geography of the place they live in. Number 10 is next. Amici appellamur. The verb here is appellamur. That's a form of the verb appello, which means to name something or call something. And it's first person plural, present tense. So the idea here is we are being called or we are being named. Or we could simply say we are called. And then amici means friends. So number 10 says we are called friends. Okay, before we wrap up this lesson, remember to speak some Latin, practice saying things, sentences that you make up, sentences in which you take a new word that you know and you try to manipulate it and use it in different ways. Remember to close your eyes and see the action happening in your mind while you say the words, and this will help you make a direct connection with the Latin language, and it will help you learn faster. In this particular lesson, you might want to practice with the passive voice. Why don't we make up a few sentences together just for practice? We could say, relinquo, that's I'm leaving behind. Relinquor, I'm being left behind, or I am left behind. You could say Galli reliquuntur, the Gauls are being left behind. Using the verb wostow, you could say wostow agrum, I am destroying the field. Wastamus agros, we are destroying the fields. Or you could make it passive. You could say ager wastatur, the field is being destroyed. Agri wastantur, the fields are being destroyed or laid waste. With the verb video, you could say that you see different things. Video nautam, I see the sailor. You could say videmus nautam, we see the sailor. Videmus Gallos, we see the Gauls. Using the verb mito, you could say mito kopias ad Galliam, I am sending the troops to Gaul. You could say Caesar mittit kopias in Galliam. Caesar is sending the troops into Gaul, you could use the word expugno and say expugno oppidum, I'm capturing the town. You could make it passive and say oppidum expugnatur, the town is being captured. And don't forget, you also have all your verbs of being, which you learned earlier. Sum means I am. Sum nauta, I am a sailor. Sum Romanus, I'm a Roman. Non sum nauta, I am not a sailor. The word es, that's spelled es, means you are. So you could say es nauta. If you're a boy or a girl, you could say sum puella, I'm a girl. Sum puer, I'm a boy. Es puella, you are a girl. Es puer, you are a boy. Sumus means we are. Sumus pueri, sumus puellae. Estis means y'all are. So now that you know more words, there are many more sentences that you could make up. Okay, so there's lots of work to do just within your own mind. So take all the techniques you've learned, all the grammatical structures, all the endings, and just start to practice saying them. Say sentences, thoughts, ideas. If you make a mistake, it's okay. Just keep practicing and you'll improve over time. But above all, just make sure you do it a little bit each day. Okay, that's it for this lesson. We'll see you next time in the next installment of Lenny's Latin class. That's in Lesson 11.